So we're going to come back to the master sequence now and have a look at what we've created so far. So let's just give this a little trim either side and press it up against there. And we're just going to move our end frame over here. So now that we've got a scene composed of a few shots, we're going to have a look at the post-process settings. You could think of these as kind of a post-production effect where you can apply things like color grades, you can modify lens flare and bloom, and a whole bunch of advanced settings. So if I go over here in the outliner, I can search post and I'll see this post-process volume come up. So if I select that, we get a huge amount of parameters in the details. Now, this post-process has already been set up with some settings to make the scene look how it's currently looking. So one handy trick in Unreal, if you want to see what settings have changed on an object, is to go over here, click the cogwheel, and click this top button, Show Only Modified Properties. And then it's only going to show us the parameters that have been changed from the default settings. So we can actually see here, the only things that have been changed is the exposure has been locked to a minimum and maximum of 1, and it's been set to infinite extent, which basically means it covers the whole level. This will make more sense in a second. What we're going to do, we're going to exit out of the camera, lock for the shots track. We're going to come out, and we're actually going to just delete this existing post-process and see what happens. All that should really change is the exposure. So with that gone, instantly our scene starts getting brighter and brighter until we see this. But if we come up to somewhere where it's quite bright, like say this light, the scene gets a bit darker. Now this is because of auto exposure. So by default, Unreal Engine has auto exposure, which will kind of emulate the human eye, where in a dark environment, the eye adapts and things get brighter, and in a bright environment, the eye adapts and things get darker. In film, we don't like this because that's not how camera lenses work, and it's not how we've grown accustomed to using cameras over the past 100 years. So on the left, we're going to go quickly add to project, visual effects, and then post-process volume. We can just click that one, and it's going to add it into our level. It's added it outside over here, so we're just going to drag this back in. So by default, this will actually do nothing. So with it selected, we can look over here on our details panel, and all our parameters are gone. Now, this is because it's currently set to show only the modified properties, but we haven't modified anything. So we're going to tick that off and then have a look here. The first settings we see that are already shown is the exposure, and that's actually what we want to change. So we want to go in and we want to change the min EV100 and max EV100, and we want to set them both to 1. And the reason we do this is to lock the exposure down to a constant. So if we now come inside this box, it instantly changes. But once we go outside our box, things go back to how they were before. So by default, a post-process volume only works inside this box. So to make it work otherwise, like across the whole level, which is what I'd advise to start with, you should search for unbound. So if you then tick that box, it'll apply to the whole level. Exiting back out of there, we can see we have this full list of parameters to change. Let's go over to our shot, and then up the top right, having selected the post-process volume, we can start changing some values and see what they do. So a lot of these values are best to be left at default if you're going after something semi-realistic, but they're also a lot of fun to change. So let's go into chromatic aberration, intensity, and we can see if we crank that up, it gets pretty crazy. But if we leave that at something a little bit subtle, like 0.4, it does add a little bit of grittiness to the scene. We can go to the dirt mask. We can tick on dirt mask texture and have a look through here. If we search dirt, we get a bunch of textures. But if we hover over, they're from the advanced glass pack and they're intended to add dirt to the glass. So we're actually looking for a default dirt mask. One thing you can do in Unreal is view content that's part of the engine rather than part of the project. So this means that it's available in every project you create in Unreal. So if you go over here on the right and you select the cogwheel, you can click Show Engine Content. And once you do that, you get a whole bunch of extra stuff. We're looking for that dirt, and we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we get here this black and white dirt mask. So we're going to select that one. Then we're going to bring that up. And let's exit the shot for a second, just so we can appreciate what this is actually doing. Do you see now when the light's hitting the frame like this, we're getting these aberrations? If I set the dirt mask intensity to 0, they go away. If I set it to something crazy, like 100, you can really see it. Do you see that there? So that's what the dirt mask does. It just adds this kind of grit and dirt on the front of the lens that can, again, kind of ground you in the scene, but you don't want to go overkill like this with it. It can kind of make it look like it's a real camera. So we're going to go back and preview through our shot. And it's currently set, way too high. So let's bring that back to 8. It's there, but it's very subtle. So if we wanted to, we could go in and turn lens flares on by setting the intensity to 1. And we get this somewhat subtle lens flare. Or you could even change that to a crazy high value if you wanted to go for that kind of effect. I'm going to leave it for 1 for now. You can go to image effects and turn on a bit of a vignette to create some darkness around the edge of your shot. Where it gets really interesting is down here in the color grade. So if you open this up, you can change the temperature quite easily. So this is a good one to change if you just want to make everything feel a bit warmer and nicer, or a bit colder and harsher. So you just click the temperature on that and key it down, and you can go to something much more bluey and depressing. Or you can key it up and go for something a bit more warm and pleasant. You can also go in and you can change all of these values for saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, just like you would in Photoshop. So the key to changing these values is actually to do more subtle changes, because the more you go overboard, the more noticeable it is and the more it detracts from your story. So let's try a saturation of something like 0.9 or 0.8. And if you turn this on and off, you can see the effect, and it's just enough to suck some of the color out of that scene. Similarly for the contrast, let's create a little less contrast. Maybe something around 0.8 as well. Just flattens everything out, makes everything a bit less interesting, and can help us sell that kind of bored, lonely feeling. But I find changing the color most effective down here in these kind of shadows, midtones, and highlights categories. So if you click on the gain, and you could just add a little bit of color to some bits of your scene. So maybe a blue gain to the shadows, and more of a warmy orange to the highlights. And if you ever want to see the effect you're having, you can just click on and off the post-process as a whole, or click on and off using individual checker boxes. Now, there's 100 other options in here to control things like film grain, motion blur, how ambient occlusion looks, but we're not going to go over all of them. Feel free to go through and experiment. It's honestly the best way to learn what all of these do. And if you ever have any issues, you can always delete and start again, or go in here, show only modified properties, and double check what you've actually changed. Just always remember to return it back. That's been a quick overview of the post-process volume and how you can use it to change the feel of your animated scenes.